She said I was frigid, her words cut deeper than any knife, echoing in my chest long after the fight was over. I remember standing there, frozen, wondering if she was right. Wondering if maybe something was broken inside me, something that made me hard to love. I let her voice crawl under my skin until I almost believed it myself. But what I didn't know then was that sometimes love doesn't come in the way we expect. Sometimes it doesn't crash through the door like a storm, it slips in quietly, as soft as lips brushing against a strawberry before they touch yours. When she called me frigid, it wasn't just an insult, it was a sentence that echoed over and over again in my mind. I stood in our kitchen, staring at her as if she had just stabbed me, though her weapon was only words. She shouted with such fire in her eyes, like she had finally found the one weakness she could use to break me. My throat tightened, and I couldn't even defend myself. I wanted to scream that she was wrong, that I was capable of warmth, of passion, of love, but the silence inside me was louder than anything I could have said. I let her words bury themselves deep, deeper than I thought possible, and they began to grow roots in the quiet corners of my soul. After she slammed the door that night, leaving me alone, I sat on the cold floor and replayed the argument again and again. I thought of every moment she had rolled her eyes when I didn't react the way she wanted, every time she accused me of not loving enough, every sigh when I failed to satisfy her impossible hunger for control. I didn't realize it then, but her anger had never been about me being cold, it had been about me not bending enough, not breaking enough, not giving her the kind of power she craved. Still, in my brokenness, I believed her. I looked in the mirror and asked myself if I was truly the woman who couldn't feel, who couldn't give, who couldn't love the right way. And when you ask yourself a question like that too many times, you begin to wear the answer like a chain. Days became weeks, and I carried her words like scars no one could see. Friends told me to move on, but how could I move on when every quiet moment was filled with her voice whispering that I was unworthy? I began to hide from people, avoiding their touch, avoiding their eyes, afraid they would see the flaw in me, the coldness I thought I carried. I laughed less, spoke less, and let my world shrink until it was just me and the echo of her cruelty. Nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I would remember the look in her eyes when she said it, sharp and final, as though she had always known I was a disappointment. I would curl into myself, trying to shut out the weight of loneliness, but it only grew heavier. I longed for proof that she was wrong, for proof that I was still capable of something soft, something beautiful. Yet every time I thought about reaching out to someone new, I felt a wall inside me, a reminder of the last time I had tried, and the ruin it had left behind. I thought maybe love was not meant for me, that I had been born without the ability to feel the kind of fire others spoke about. And then came the day when the smallest, most unexpected moment began to unravel all those lies. A moment so simple it should have passed unnoticed, but it didn't. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive with fireworks, sometimes it arrives with something as delicate as a strawberry, held between two lips, waiting to be shared. I never expected comfort to come from a stranger. I had convinced myself that the world wasn't safe anymore, that every person I met would eventually see me as she did, as something broken, something lacking. But life has a strange way of surprising us when we least expect it. It was a quiet afternoon, one of those days when the air feels heavy but calm, and I had decided to escape the noise of my thoughts by sitting in a small cafe not far from my apartment. I sat at a corner table, hiding behind a book I wasn't really reading, sipping a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. That's when she appeared. She was laughing with the cashier, her voice light and warm, like a song that instantly made you want to smile even if you didn't know why. She didn't seem to notice me at first, too caught up in her world of ease and brightness. But then, as she walked by, her eyes met mine, and something in the way she looked at me made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't the kind of stare that makes you self-conscious. It was gentle, curious, almost like she could sense the heaviness I was carrying, though I had worked so hard to hide it. She smiled, and I tried to look away, but her presence lingered even as she sat a few tables down with a plate of strawberries and a cup of tea. I told myself to ignore her, to retreat back into my shell where it was safe, but my eyes betrayed me. They kept drifting back to her, studying the way her hair fell softly over her shoulders, the way she held each strawberry as though savoring not just the taste but the moment itself. There was something deliberate in the way she lived, as if even small things deserved attention. It was so different from the chaos I had left behind. I thought about leaving, afraid of what it meant to feel drawn to someone again, but my body refused to move. Then, as if fate had overheard my hesitation, she stood and walked toward me, holding one of the strawberries between her fingers. My heart jumped into my throat. She leaned slightly over my table, her eyes sparkling with mischief and tenderness all at once, and without asking, she offered the strawberry. My first instinct was to pull back, to refuse, but something in her gaze disarmed me. It wasn't pushy or demanding, it was an invitation, one I could accept or decline. And then she did something I'll never forget. She brought the strawberry close to her lips, brushing against it softly before leaning forward, closing the space between us. I froze, my chest tight, my hands gripping the edge of the table, every nerve alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. She touched the strawberry to my lips, and for the first time in so long, I let someone in, even if it was just a simple taste of fruit shared between two strangers. It wasn't the strawberry that made my heart race, it was the way she looked at me, like I wasn't broken at all, like I had never been frigid or empty. In that single moment, she gave me back a piece of myself I thought I had lost forever. I didn't even know her name yet, but I knew this wasn't going to be the last time our worlds collided. The strawberry lingered on my lips long after the taste had gone, and with it came a sensation I had almost forgotten existed. My heart was beating too fast, my palms damp against the table, and for the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't drowning in the weight of my ex's words. Instead, I was completely lost in the presence of a woman whose name I didn't even know yet. She pulled the strawberry back with a small smile, as if she understood she had startled me but wasn't apologizing for it. There was no shame in her eyes, no hesitation, just a quiet confidence that unsettled me in the best way. I wanted to ask her why she had done it, why she had chosen me out of all the people in the cafe, but my throat was tight, my voice trapped in my chest. She didn't wait for me to form words. She simply placed the half-eaten strawberry on a napkin, set it gently on my table, and said softly, "You looked like you needed something sweet." Her tone wasn't teasing, it was tender, as if she could see the exhaustion in my soul. I managed to whisper a thank you, though it came out broken, like a word I wasn't used to saying. She smiled again, warmer this time, and sat across from me without asking permission, as if the empty chair had always been meant for her. My instinct screamed to pull away, to build a wall between us before she got too close, before she discovered how damaged I truly was. But another part of me, a part one thought had been buried, leaned forward, craving the warmth she seemed to carry effortlessly. She introduced herself, her name rolling off her tongue like something soft and beautiful, and for the first time in months I said my own name without flinching, without feeling like it belonged to someone undeserving of love. The conversation began awkwardly. My words stumbled and fell, but she listened with a patience that both unnerved and soothed me. She spoke about small things, her love for tea, the way she couldn't go a day without fruit, how she liked watching strangers and imagining their stories. She didn't ask about my past, and that was a relief. She didn't try to pry open the locked doors inside me, instead, she offered me the comfort of the present moment. It felt strange to laugh again, even quietly, even for just a second. The sound felt foreign in my throat, but she looked at me like it was the most natural thing in the world. With every passing minute, I felt something shift inside me. The chains of my ex's cruelty were still there, but they loosened just a little, as though this woman's presence was proving I wasn't defined by those words, that maybe I had been wrong to carry them like a burden for so long. I noticed details about her, the way her eyes glowed when she spoke, the gentle curve of her lips when she smiled, the way she tilted her head slightly when she listened, as if she wanted to catch every syllable I offered. I found myself studying her hands too, delicate yet strong, fingers that had just fed me a strawberry but felt like they could hold an entire world if they chose to. When she finally stood to leave, I felt a pang of something I couldn't explain. It wasn't desperation, but it was a longing I hadn't felt in years. Before walking away, she leaned down slightly, her face close enough for me to breathe in her scent, a mix of jasmine and something sweeter I couldn't place. She whispered, "Don't let anyone tell you who you are," and for the first time, I believed it might be possible to heal. I watched her walk out of the cafe, carrying her warmth with her, and though the chair across from me was empty again, it didn't feel as hollow as before. It felt like the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, something fragile but alive, something that made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as broken as I thought. The days after that encounter blurred together, but her presence lingered in my mind as if she had left behind a thread connecting us. I found myself retracing the memory of her smile, the sound of her voice, and the softness of her words. "Don't let anyone tell you who you are." It echoed inside me louder than the accusations my ex had carved into my heart. For the first time, there was a counterweight, something gentle to hold against the cruelty I had endured. I didn't know why it mattered so much coming from her, a stranger, yet it did. Maybe it was because she hadn't seen me through the lens of my past. She didn't know the fights, the tears, the accusations. She saw me as I was in that moment, and that alone made me feel lighter. I returned to the cafe more than once, not because I believed she would be there, but because I wanted to feel close to the memory of her. I would sit in the same corner, order the same coffee, and let myself pretend that she might walk in again. Each time the bell above the door rang, my heart jumped, even when it wasn't her. It was strange how someone I barely knew could leave such a mark, how the smallest gesture could spark a quiet hope I thought I had lost. One evening, when the sky was painted in shades of fading orange and purple, I walked into the cafe again. I told myself it was just habit, but deep down I knew it was longing. And there she was. Sitting at a table near the window, her hair catching the glow of the fading sun, a book resting in her hand. My breath caught, and for a moment I stood frozen, afraid to believe she was real again. She looked up and caught my gaze, and the way her face lit up at the sight of me made something inside me unravel. It wasn't forced, it wasn't polite, it was genuine joy, as if she had been waiting too. I hesitated, but she waved me over, that same effortless confidence disarming me all over again. I sat down, nervous but strangely calm under her gaze. We began talking, this time with less hesitation, as though the invisible wall between us had cracked open the first day and now we were walking through it together. She asked me about small things, what books I liked, whether I enjoyed cooking, what kind of music I listened to. I found myself answering honestly, without the fear of judgment. It felt almost unreal to speak freely, to let someone hear my voice without weighing every word against the fear of being mocked or dismissed. She shared pieces of herself too, how she once left a job she hated even though it scared her, how she was learning to play the guitar, how she believed life was too short to hold back from the things that made us feel alive. Listening to her, I felt a warmth spreading through me, something soft but steady, something I didn't know I was allowed to feel. At one point, she reached across the table and touched my hand lightly, a brief brush of her fingers against mine. It wasn't bold, it wasn't demanding, but the simplicity of it made my chest tighten. No one had touched me like that in a long time, without expectation, without control, without using it as a weapon. I looked down at our hands, then back at her eyes, and I saw no judgment there, only kindness. It was terrifying and comforting all at once. When the cafe began to close, she walked me outside, and the cool air felt different with her beside me. We stood for a while under the dim streetlight, neither of us in a rush to leave. She leaned closer, not too close, just enough to make my heart race, and said softly, "You're not as hard to read as you think. There's so much warmth in you. You just don't see it yet." Her words struck me like lightning, not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they were true in a way I didn't want to admit. For so long, I had seen myself through the cruel lens of my past, but she was showing me another reflection, one I wanted to believe in. I walked home that night with her voice echoing in my head, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by what had been said to me. Instead, I felt a spark of something new, something fragile, something that whispered that maybe love wasn't gone for me after all. That night I could hardly sleep. Her words kept replaying in my mind like a song that refused to fade, soft but powerful enough to stir something buried deep inside me. For so long I had believed in the version of myself that my ex had painted, cold, distant, incapable of love. It had become my truth, not because it was real, but because I had allowed it to take root and grow. Yet now, with only a few conversations, a strawberry, and the warmth of her gaze, this woman had begun to shake the foundation of that lie. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what she saw in me that I couldn't see in myself. Why did she bother speaking to me, laughing with me, reaching for my hand like I was worth touching? That question lingered long into the early hours, but instead of sinking into despair, it left me restless with possibility. The following days felt different. The world outside hadn't changed, but something in me had shifted ever so slightly. I noticed the details around me more, the way sunlight spilled across the pavement, the way strangers laughed at small jokes, the way even silence could feel alive if you let it. It was as though she had pulled me out of a fog I didn't know I was living in. I caught myself smiling at nothing, remembering the way she tilted her head when she listened, the way her eyes softened as though every word I spoke mattered. That feeling scared me, but it also drew me back to the cafe again and again, like a moth circling a light it doesn't yet understand. One evening, as autumn leaves scattered across the streets, I found her sitting in the same place by the window, a mug in her hands and her gaze fixed outside as though she was waiting for something, or someone. My chest tightened when her eyes met mine, and this time I didn't hesitate. I sat across from her, and without a word, she slid a plate across the table. Strawberries again. I laughed softly, unable to stop myself, and she grinned as if she had been waiting for that sound. It felt strange, almost healing, to laugh freely in front of someone. She didn't rush the conversation, she let it unfold slowly, as though we had all the time in the world. I told her pieces of myself I hadn't shared with anyone in years, not the whole story, but fragments, how I had stopped painting, how I sometimes woke up feeling like a stranger in my own skin, how I often wondered if love was something I was destined to watch from a distance. She listened quietly, her eyes never leaving mine, and when I finished, she didn't pity me, didn't try to fix me, didn't say I was wrong for feeling that way. She just said, "You're carrying pain that was never yours to carry. Someone put it on you, and you believed it. But it doesn't belong to you." Those words struck me harder than I expected. Tears stung the back of my eyes, not from sadness but from the weight of release. No one had ever said it so plainly before, and suddenly it felt like maybe I could begin to set it down. That night we walked together after leaving the cafe, our footsteps in sync as if we had been doing it for years. She spoke about her childhood, her mother's garden, the summers she spent picking berries until her hands were stained red. I listened to her voice, low and steady, and realized how much I wanted to keep hearing it, how much I wanted her presence to remain in my life. There was no confession of feelings, no sudden declarations, just the quiet certainty that something was building between us, fragile but real. When we reached the corner where our paths split, she touched my arm lightly, her fingers lingering for a second longer than necessary, and whispered, "Don't be afraid to let yourself feel." Then she walked away, leaving me standing under the streetlight with my heart pounding in my chest. That night, for the first time in so long, I didn't fall asleep haunted by the past. I fell asleep thinking of her voice, her touch, and the possibility that maybe I wasn't broken after all, maybe I was just waiting for someone to show me how to be whole again. The following week carried a rhythm I hadn't felt in years, as if my days had finally found a pulse again. I caught myself waking earlier, drinking my coffee slower, noticing the colors of the morning sky instead of rushing through life like a ghost. And woven through all of it was her. The thought of her smile, the way her words wrapped around me like a blanket, the feeling of her fingers brushing mine. She was no longer just a stranger from a cafe, she had become a part of my thoughts, my quiet, my healing. Yet along with the warmth she brought, fear crept in too. Fear that this fragile thing could break, that I might ruin it before it even had the chance to become real. Every time I felt joy, my ex's voice would creep back into the edges of my mind, whispering that it wouldn't last, that I wasn't enough, that I would be abandoned again. But then I remembered her words, "Don't let anyone tell you who you are," and I tried to fight back against that shadow, even if it was only for a few minutes at a time. One evening, when the sky was heavy with rain and the cafe glowed like a lantern against the gray, I found her already waiting inside. She had ordered tea for herself, and without asking, she had ordered coffee for me. The small gesture hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about the coffee, it was about being remembered, considered, known in the smallest way. I sat across from her, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't name, and for a while we just listened to the rain pounding against the windows. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full, alive, like the world outside was giving us a shelter for something unspoken. Finally, she leaned forward and asked me about the parts of myself I had hidden, what made me happiest once, what I had stopped doing, what dreams I still carried even if they felt distant. No one had asked me questions like that in years. My ex had never cared about my dreams, only about control. But this woman, she asked with genuine curiosity, like my answers mattered. I told her about painting, how I used to lose myself in colors and canvas, how it had been the only way I knew how to make sense of my feelings. But after years of being told it was pointless, I had stopped. I admitted how empty that silence felt, how I sometimes stood in front of a blank canvas and felt paralyzed by the fear of failing. She listened without judgment, her eyes soft, and when I finished she simply said, "Then paint for yourself. Not for anyone else. Paint because it's yours." Her voice made it sound so simple, but I felt a lump rise in my throat. It had been so long since anyone gave me permission to simply exist as I was. The cafe was closing when she reached into her bag and pulled out a small packet of strawberries. She placed it on the table, her grin playful yet tender, and said, "A promise. When you start painting again, we'll eat these to celebrate." I laughed, though my chest ached with the strange sweetness of it all. No one had ever celebrated my small steps before. No one had cared enough to notice them. As we walked out into the damp night, the rain softened to a drizzle, and we walked side by side beneath the glow of street lights. At one point she took my hand, slowly, as if waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. My fingers curled into hers, tentative at first, then steady, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe in someone else's touch. When we reached the corner where we usually parted ways, she didn't let go immediately. She squeezed my hand gently, her eyes holding mine, and said, "You don't have to rush. Healing doesn't follow a clock. But don't close the door on yourself either." Her words stayed with me long after she disappeared into the night. I stood there with the sound of rain around me, holding on to the memory of her hand in mine, and for once, instead of drowning in loneliness, I felt the fragile beginnings of hope pressing against the cracks in my heart. The next days were not easy. Healing never moves in a straight line, and I found myself pulled between the old weight of my past and the fragile hope of what was slowly blooming between us. There were mornings when I woke with her voice still in my mind, and I felt light, almost free. But there were also nights when the darkness pressed down harder, when my ex's cruel words returned with sharp clarity, whispering that this was only temporary, that I was still the same broken woman who would never be enough. I hated how easily those shadows still found me, how quickly I could slip back into believing them. Yet now there was something different, there was a counterbalance. Whenever those thoughts grew loud, I remembered the way she looked at me in the cafe, the way she touched my hand like it was something worth holding, the way she spoke about warmth as though it had always been mine to claim. That memory pulled me back each time I began to drown, like a rope anchoring me to the possibility of something better. One evening she invited me to meet her outside the cafe after it closed. The night was cool, the sky sharp with stars, and she carried a small bag with her. We walked together to a nearby park, the grass still damp from an earlier rain, and sat on a bench beneath a streetlight that buzzed faintly above us. From the bag she pulled out a sketchbook and a set of pencils, placing them in my hands without ceremony. I looked at her, startled, my chest tightening with both gratitude and fear. She smiled softly and said, "I thought maybe you needed a way back to yourself. No pressure. Just try." Her words shook me. No one had ever cared enough to give me something that touched the deepest part of who I was. I stared at the blank page for what felt like forever, paralyzed by the fear of failing again. But she sat quietly beside me, not rushing, not watching, just letting me breathe. Eventually, my hand began to move, slow and hesitant, sketching the outline of something small, a leaf, a line, a shape without form. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was mine. And as the pencil scratched against the paper, a lump rose in my throat because it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had abandoned. She leaned closer, her shoulder brushing mine, and whispered, "See? You're not frigid. You're alive." The simplicity of her words cracked something open in me. Tears blurred the lines on the page, but I didn't hide them this time. I let them fall, and she didn't try to stop me. She just slipped her arm around me, pulling me into her warmth, holding me as though my trembling wasn't something to fix but something to honor. For the first time in years, I cried without shame, without fear of being mocked or dismissed. Her embrace was steady, grounding, and in that moment I realized how much I had longed for someone who wouldn't just see my pain but would stay through it. We sat there for what felt like hours, the night folding around us like a blanket, the sketchbook resting on my lap with its imperfect beginnings. She didn't ask for explanations, didn't press me to speak, and somehow that silence was more healing than any words could have been. When I finally lifted my head, she looked at me with an expression so tender it made my chest ache. She brushed a strand of hair from my face and said quietly, "You don't need to prove anything. Just being here, just choosing to try again, is enough." Those words stayed with me as we walked back together, her hand finding mine once again, this time with more certainty. There was no hesitation in my grip either. The city lights shimmered across wet pavement, and for the first time I realized I wasn't just moving through life, I was beginning to live it again. And with her beside me, each step forward felt like it belonged to a future I hadn't dared to dream of before. The night everything changed was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like most of the moments that had brought me back to life. We had been walking along the riverbank, the water reflecting the scattered city lights, our hands linked in that way that felt so natural now, as though it had always been meant. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and damp stone, and for once I wasn't afraid of silence. I had grown so used to filling empty spaces with explanations or apologies, desperate to prove I was worth keeping. But with her, silence wasn't a punishment. It was a language in itself, a comfort, a space where I was allowed to simply exist. After a while she stopped and turned to face me, her eyes searching mine with that same calm intensity that had unraveled me from the very first day. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there, her fingers tightening gently around mine, as if grounding me in the present moment. And then she said softly, "Do you know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who has been carrying too much pain for too long. I see someone who was made to believe she was less than she is. But I also see someone who is still here, still fighting, still capable of love even when she doubts it." Her words pierced through me like light breaking into a dark room, and I felt my throat tighten, my chest heavy with emotions I had been holding back. For so long, I had wanted to hear something like this, not because I needed saving, but because I needed reminding that I was more than the scars I carried. I couldn't speak at first. My voice felt trapped, my heart too raw. But she didn't rush me. She just stayed there, her eyes steady, her presence unwavering, as if giving me all the time in the world. Finally, with tears burning in my eyes, I whispered, "She made me believe I was nothing. She made me believe I couldn't feel, that I wasn't enough." My voice cracked, and I hated how small I sounded, but she lifted her hand and touched my face gently, her thumb brushing away the tear before it fell. "She was wrong," she said firmly, her voice carrying no hesitation. "You are more than enough. And anyone who couldn't see that didn't deserve you." Those words broke something inside me, not in a way that destroyed, but in a way that freed. The tears spilled then, unrestrained, and I let them, because for the first time I wasn't crying out of despair. I was crying because someone finally saw me, really saw me, not as broken, not as frigid, but as a woman capable of love, warmth, and life. She pulled me closer then, her forehead resting gently against mine, and the world seemed to still around us. I could feel her breath against my skin, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat through the space between us. My chest ached with a mix of fear and longing, but I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. And when her lips finally met mine, it wasn't fire or chaos or anything overwhelming. It was soft, tender, almost reverent, as if she understood that I had been waiting my whole life for a kiss that felt like home. I melted into it, my hands trembling as they clung to her, and for the first time I allowed myself to believe that love could feel gentle, safe, and real. The kiss deepened slightly, not rushed, not demanding, just an unspoken promise that she wasn't here to take anything from me, she was here to give. When we finally pulled apart, I could barely breathe, but for once it wasn't because of fear. It was because I felt alive in a way I never thought possible. We stood there for a long time, holding on to each other, letting the night wrap around us like a secret. And in that quiet embrace, I realized something I had never dared to believe before: I was not broken. I had been hurt, yes. I had been lied to, diminished, made to doubt myself. But none of that defined me. What defined me was this moment, the way I felt in her arms, the way her kiss had rewritten every cruel word I had once believed. For the first time, I wasn't haunted by my past. I was standing in my present, looking toward a future that finally felt possible. As we walked home together, our hands still intertwined, I felt a peace settle over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from forgetting, it was the kind that comes from finally letting go. I knew there would still be hard days, still be nights when old wounds tried to open again. But now I had proof that I wasn't alone, that love could be soft and steady, that healing could be shared. And when she squeezed my hand and smiled at me under the glow of the streetlight, I knew that no matter what came next, I had found something worth holding on to. Something worth believing in. Something that reminded me that I had never been frigid at all, I had only been waiting for the right warmth to bring me back to life.